Have you ever been in one of those situations where, you know, trying to do the right thing just feels murky, not clear at all?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Especially in complex fields like, say, banking. The rules, what's expected, your own gut feeling,
Yeah.
it can all get tangled up.
Exactly. It's like your internal compass suddenly starts spinning. And that whole complicated area, well, that's what we're diving into today.
Right. We're talking ethics.
Yes, ethics. We're going to unpack what that really means, look at some really powerful ideas, theories that guide moral thinking, and give you some practical ways to actually make ethical decisions.
And we've got some great source material that looks at this, especially how it all plays out in the financial world.
Our goal here is pretty simple. Take these sometimes dense ethical ideas and make them clear, usable insights. We want to help you understand how people and organizations navigate this tricky terrain of right and wrong.
Yeah, especially in banking. We'll sprinkle in some perhaps surprising facts and definitely some real-world examples you might recognize.
Okay, let's jump right in. What are we talking about when we say ethics?
Well, fundamentally, it's about the rules and standards for how people should act. It can be society-wide or specific to a group, like profession or a culture.
And there's a key difference here with morals, isn't there? People often use them interchangeably.
They do, but it's a really important distinction. Morals are usually seen as personal, internal, your individual beliefs about right and wrong. Ethics, though, tend to be external.
External how?
They're often created by social systems. Think professional codes of conduct, cultural norms. So, ethically speaking, something might be right or wrong because, well, society deems it to be so. It's more of a collective agreement.
Okay, that makes sense. And that difference immediately flags another big one. Ethics versus the law.
Ah, yes. The assumption that if it's legal, it must be ethical.
Right. But our sources really hammer home that just following the law is like the bare minimum. It's the starting point, not the finish line.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
You can follow every single regulation to the letter and still act in a way that most people would consider unethical.
Can you give an example? Maybe from banking.
Sure. Imagine a bank teller. They see a transaction that looks suspicious, maybe potential money laundering. Now, anti-money laundering rules are strict. You cannot tip off the customer.
Right, that would break the law itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, to comply with the law and prevent the crime, the teller might have to, well, lie. Maybe they say the computer system is slow or down just to stall while they secretly alert their manager compliance team.
Okay.
So that lie is perfectly legal in that context. It's even arguably part of their duty. But is it ethical to lie? It immediately challenges that simple idea that lying is always wrong.
Wow. Yeah. That puts you in a real bind. It's a proper ethical dilemma.
It is. Or think about something like payday lending. Many of these companies operate completely legally,
Mm-hmm. Within the regulations.
but they often target really vulnerable people with incredibly high interest rates. So the debate rages. Is it ethical to profit so much from people who are already in desperate financial straits, even if it's technically legal?
It forces you to ask uncomfortable questions like, where's the line? When does an interest rate become unethical?
Precisely. And these kinds of complex questions bring us neatly to ethical theories. These aren't just, philosophical navel-gazing.
Okay.
They offer different frameworks, different lenses to help make decisions. They focus on different things, maybe the consequences, maybe your duties, maybe your character.
All right, let's unpack some of those. Where should we start?
Let's start with maybe the oldest approach, virtue ethics. This one isn't so much about rules or outcomes, but about character.
Character.
Yeah, it focuses on developing good traits, virtues like honesty, kindness, courage, integrity. The core question isn't, what should I do? But more like, what kind of person should I be?
Interesting. So it's about embodying goodness.
Exactly. There's a great example in one of our sources, Clive Thornton. He became CEO of Abbey National Building Society in the UK back in 1979. Bit of a surprise choice, apparently.
Okay.
But he really shook things up. He strongly believed that building societies shouldn't just be about profit. They had a social purpose, helping people own homes, supporting social housing. He showed incredible dedication, that social vision, and real courage, even when regulators were wary of his plans.
So he led by example, embodying those virtues.
Precisely. It's a perfect illustration of tone at the top.
Right.
His character influenced the whole organization.
Yeah.
Virtue ethics makes you think about the long game, who you're becoming through your actions.
Right. It's not just a calculation for one decision. It's about building ethical muscle over time.
Well put. Okay, moving on. Next up, we have the duties-based approach, also called deontology.
Deontology sounds serious.
Huh? It can be. This approach focuses on our obligations, our duties. It says certain actions are inherently right or wrong, kind of regardless of the consequences.
So rules are rules.
In a way, yes. Think of things like thou shalt not kill or always tell the truth. This is where you find ideas like Immanuel Kant's categorical imperatives.
Ah, Kant. I remember him from philosophy class.
Right. His famous maxim, too, says you should always treat people as ends in themselves, never just as a means to an end. Basically, don't use people.
Okay, that makes sense. Like the golden rule, almost. Treat others as you wish to be treated.
Exactly. That idea pops up everywhere. Now, applying this, remember that banking example with Shays and Charlie. Shays works at the bank, Charlie mentions his parents, and says, maybe let's slip something confidential about their accounts, assuming Charlie already knew.
Tricky.
From a duties perspective, the bank has a very strict duty of confidentiality. So did C's fail in that duty, even if their intentions weren't bad? This approach would focus on the breach of duty itself.
But what about that lying example earlier? The bank teller. A strict duty approach might say lying is always wrong.
That's the challenge, isn't it? Our sources mentioned the philosopher R.M. Hare's famous example. If a terrorist asks you where their intended victim is hiding, does the duty to tell the truth override the duty to protect life? Strict duty-based ethics can lead to some really tough spots.
Yeah, it seems inflexible sometimes, which I guess leads us somewhere else.
It does. It leads us to the consequentialist approach, or teleology. This one is all about the outcomes.
Okay, so the ends justify the means.
Sort of. It judges whether an action is right or wrong based purely on its consequences. The most famous version is utilitarianism.
Jeremy Bentham, right. The greatest happiness for the greatest number.
That's the one. You weigh up the good and bad outcomes and choose the action that produces the best overall result for the most people.
Okay, can we have a banking example for this one?
A really stark one is the Payment Protection Insurance PPI mis-selling scandal in the UK.
Oh yeah, that was huge.
Massive. Millions of policies were sold, often pushed alongside loans, sometimes almost as a condition. But the catch was, the policies often had so many exclusions, they were almost useless for many customers.
Like if you were self-employed, you basically weren't covered for unemployment.
Exactly. So the consequence for the banks was initially profit. Good for them, maybe good for shareholders in the short term. But the consequence for millions of customers was paying for something worthless, leading to huge compensation payouts later.
So from a utilitarian view, the overall harm to the large number of customers vastly outweighed the benefit to the banks.
Precisely. It was a utilitarian failure, even if parts of it might have seemed okay from a purely profit-driven consequence perspective initially.
Wow. Okay, so we have virtues, being good, duties, following rules, and consequences, getting good outcomes. What if they point in different directions?
That's where pluralism comes in. It's not really a separate theory, more an acknowledgement that, well, ethical problems are messy.
Yeah, they rarely fit neatly into one box.
Exactly. Pluralism suggests you need to consider all these angles, virtues, duties, consequences, because real-world dilemmas usually have elements of all three. It's multidimensional.
That seems much more realistic. Okay, so we have these theories as guides, but how do we actually apply them when faced with a tough choice? Are there, like, practical steps?
Yes, absolutely. That's where ethical decision-making models come in. They provide a structure, a process to work through the dilemma instead of just going with your gut.
Okay, give me one.
A really simple but effective one is the Blanchard-Peale framework. Just 3 questions.
3. I can handle 3.
Right. 1, is it legal? That's your baseline check. 2, is it balanced? Meaning, is it fair to everyone involved? And 3, how will I feel about myself afterward?
Ah, the mirror test.
Exactly. Can you look yourself in the eye and feel okay about what you did? It's a quick, intuitive check.
That sounds useful for everyday stuff. What about more complex professional situations, like in banking?
For those, you often need something more robust. The American Accounting Association model, the AAA model, is a really good one. It's quite comprehensive, 7 steps.
7 steps.
Okay.
Walk me through it. Maybe use an example. Our sources mentioned a practice question about Brig Bank.
Right, Brig Bank. They want to close 5 branches. These branches are unprofitable, but they're in areas with lots of low-income and elderly residents, and there's a public outcry against the closure.
Okay, classic dilemma. So step 1 of the AAA model.
Step 1, what are the facts? Branch is losing money. Located in vulnerable areas. High-volume, low-value transactions. Community is protesting. Other banks might also be leaving, reducing options. Those are the key facts.
Okay. Step 2, what are the ethical issues?
It's really that conflict, isn't it? Balancing the bank's need for profit and responsibility to shareholders against its social responsibility to the community. especially vulnerable customers. Access to banking, financial inclusion, fairness, all that.
Got it. Step 3. What are the norms, principles, and values?
Well, you've got the value of profitability, shareholder return, but also values like customer care, fairness, social responsibility, maybe even community support. Principles could range from pure profit maximization to ensuring basic service access.
Okay. Step 4. Alternative courses of action.
Obvious ones. Close all 5, close maybe just 1 or 2, keep them all open. Or maybe explore alternatives like mobile banking vans, reduced hours, shared branches. Lots of possibilities.
Right. Step 5. What's the best course consistent with those values and principles? This feels like the core of it.
It is, and it's tough. A purely utilitarian view might say close them benefit the majority of shareholders by cutting losses. But a duties-based view might focus on the duty of care to existing customers. A virtue approach might ask what a good bank would do for its community. There's real tension here.
Step 6. What are the consequences of each alternative?
Closing saves money, but risks huge reputational damage, political backlash, and real hardship for those customers. Keeping them open means ongoing losses, potentially subsidized by other customers, which might affect overall service levels or bank stability.
And finally, step 7. What's the decision?
This is where the leadership has to weigh everything up, the facts, the ethics, the values, the consequences, and make the call. The model doesn't give you the answer, but it forces you to consider everything ethically, not just financially.
That's incredibly useful. It forces a kind of structured thinking that might prevent purely reactive decisions.
Exactly. Now, related to this, why do some ethical issues feel much more intense than others? Why do some grab our attention and demand action?
Good question. Is there a theory for that too?
There is. It's called moral intensity, a concept from Thomas Jones. It suggests that the characteristics of the issue itself influence how much we recognize it as ethical and feel compelled to act.
Okay, what kind of characteristics?
Jones identified 6 key ones. 1. Magnitude of consequences. How much harm or benefit is involved. 2. Social consensus. How much agreement is there that the action is wrong or right? 3. Probability of effect. How likely is the predicted outcome to actually happen? 4. Temporal immediacy. How soon will the consequences occur? 5. Proximity. How close socially, psychologically, physically do we feel to those affected? 6. Concentration of effect. Is the impact concentrated on a few people or spread thinly over many?
Let's apply that. Another banking example. Upright Bankpolt wants to start charging fees on accounts with low balances, but lots of transactions often used by people on salaries or lower incomes.
Okay, let's run through the moral intensity components for that decision. Magnitude of consequences. For low-income customers, even small fees can have a big impact, so potentially high magnitude.
Right.
Social consensus. Is there general agreement that charging vulnerable customers is wrong? If consumer groups are shouting about it, consensus is higher, increasing intensity.
Makes sense.
Probability of effect. If the bank imposes the charges, it's almost certain those customers will be affected. High probability.
Yep.
Temporal immediacy. If the charges start next week versus next year, the immediate start feels much more intense.
Definitely.
Proximity. How close does the bank's board feel to these customers? If they're seen as abstract numbers, the proximity is low, potentially reducing the perceived intensity for the decision makers.
That's a bit chilling.
Concentration of effect. The negative impact is highly concentrated on this specific group, making it feel more intense than, say, a tiny fee increase for everyone.
So you can see how these factors combine to make an issue feel more or less ethically urgent.
Exactly. It explains why some things spark outrage and others just don't.
Fascinating. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. We've talked about theories and models. What about the individual? How does our own sense of right and wrong actually develop over time? Our moral reasoning?
Great question. The groundwork was laid by Jean Piaget, looking at cognitive development in children, but Lawrence Kohlberg really built on this.
Kohlberg, right. He had stages, didn't he?
Yes, 3 main levels, each with 2 stages. He argued we progress through them sequentially. We start at a pre-conventional level, basically, avoiding punishment and seeking rewards.
Like a toddler learning no.
Pretty much. Then comes the conventional level, where we conform to social rules and expectations, wanting approval, maintaining social order. Most adults operate here much of the time.
Okay.
And finally, the post-conventional level. This is where people act based on internal, universal ethical principles, justice, rights, fairness, even if it means breaking rules or going against the crowd.
And he tested this with dilemmas, right? Like the Heinz dilemma.
That's the famous one. Should Heinz steal an overpriced drug to save his dying wife?
Uh.
Kohlberg wasn't interested in the yes or no, but the reasoning behind the answer. That revealed the stage of moral development.
Let's apply this. Remember Theo, the bank trader. Ignored controls, broke limits, all for big bonuses. Where does he fit?
Theo sounds like a classic example of Kohlberg's pre-conventional level, probably stage 2, individual interest. His reasoning was basically, what's in it for me? Rich rewards. He wasn't thinking about rules, conventional or universal ethics, post-conventional, just personal gain.
Which is obviously not ideal for someone in a position of trust in a bank.
Not at all. Ideally, professionals, especially in finance, should be operating at that post-conventional level, thinking about fairness, integrity, the wider impact.
Okay, what about Hope at Dawkins Bank? She's worried about this consultant, Felipe, because of his past high-pressure tactics, even though he gets results now. How might her reasoning look at different Kohlberg levels if she's deciding whether to raise her concerns?
Let's think. Pre-conventional. Hope might think, if I say something, will I get in trouble? Or maybe get praised for being careful. If I stay quiet, does it make my life easier? It's about personal consequences.
Right, reward and punishment.
Conventional. She might think, what does the bank expect? What are the rules about vetting consultants? What would my colleagues do? It's about fitting in, following procedures, maintaining harmony.
Conforming to the group or rules.
Post-conventional. Here, Hope would think bigger. Is it right to potentially expose customers to high-pressure tactics, even if it helps collections? What about the principles of treating customers fairly? My duty to protect the bank's reputation for integrity. She'd act on these principles, even if it's difficult or unpopular.
You can really see the different drivers at each level. But wasn't there a critique of Kohlberg? Something about gender?
Yes, a very significant one from Carol Gilligan. Her book, In a Different Voice, argued Kohlberg's stages, based mainly on research with boys and men, didn't fully capture female moral development.
How so?
Gilligan suggested that while men often focus on an ethics of justice, abstract principles, rights, fairness, rules, like Kohlberg's higher stages, women often prioritize an ethics of care.
Ethics of care.
Yeah, focusing on relationships, responsibility to specific individuals, avoiding harm, and navigating conflicting responsibilities within a network of people. It's less about abstract rules, more about concrete relationships and needs.
So, a different but not necessarily lower form of moral reasoning?
Exactly. Gilligan proposed her own stages for women, moving from self-interest through self-sacrifice for others towards a mature ethic of balancing care for self and others based on a principle of nonviolence or avoiding hurt.
That adds another layer of complexity and understanding.
It really does. And just one more perspective on reasoning. Roger Steer talks about different types of conscience.
Oh.
He suggests 3 main types. 1, principled conscience, your internal moral compass, guided by virtues, reason, like virtue ethics. 2, social conscience, focused on the greater good, consequences for others, like utilitarianism or Gilligan's ethic of care. 3, rule compliance, based on obeying rules, duties, authority, like deontology or those early influences, parents, teachers.
Okay, how does that help?
It helps understand internal conflicts. Think of a practice question scenario. A physician driving to perform surgery witnesses a serious accident. They stop to help, potentially saving a life at the scene, but missing the surgery, which creates problems for that other patient.
Right, a terrible dilemma.
Was the decision driven by a principled conscience, being a good person, rule compliance, Hippocratic oath, duty as a doctor, or social conscience, greatest immediate good at the scene despite other consequences? Steer's model helps unpack the different ethical voices, potentially pulling that physician in different directions.
Wow. So we've covered a huge amount of ground, from defining ethics and morals, distinguishing law and ethics.
Through the major theories, virtue, duty, consequences, and practical decision models like the AAA framework.
To understanding why some issues hit harder with moral intensity and how our own moral reasoning develops through stages described by Kohlberg and Gilligan, and the different types of conscience Steer outlines.
It shows just how multi-layered ethics really is. And in today's world, especially in finance, getting to grips with this stuff isn't just an academic exercise, is it?
Not at all. It's crucial for navigating the real dilemmas that crop up constantly. Every decision has that ethical dimension, whether we always recognize it or not.
Absolutely. It underpins trust, reputation, and ultimately, sustainability.
So, to leave our listeners with something to think about, given everything we've discussed, the different theories, the models, the way our reasoning works, the intensity of issues, here's a question. How can individuals, and maybe more importantly, organizations, really build a culture where thinking ethically, reflecting on these things, and finding the courage to act rightly becomes second nature? More than just a compliance exercise or a checklist.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do we make it instinctual?
Something to definitely mull over.